Hey there guys, Next Gen Striker here, back again for another video, and today we're going to be discussing why modern DC films are just complete and utter garbage. Now, I know some people are really going to get offended by this and say, oh, you're just a Marvel fanboy or you're just a hater, but look man, the reason why I make these videos and the reason why I rant about DC, and notice how I never make anything about Marvel, is because I prefer DC to Marvel. However, DC is just getting completely decimated by Marvel. I mean, it's just a fact. The comic books, I'd say, is the only place where DC is winning against Marvel or really anybody, because that's the only thing they seem to know how to do fairly well at this point. Which is pretty sad, because if you grew up in like the 90s, early 2000s, you'd know that DC was dominant in animation. They had tons of good animated series like Batman, Superman, Static Shock, Teen Titans, Justice League. Like, it was everywhere, man. DC just had it going. And even after like the Bruce Timm era stuff, you know, we still had some cartoons that people enjoyed. Maybe not as well as like that animated universe sort of thing, but you know, we had like Batman Brave and the Bold, we had The Batman, we had like some Superman show. It was like really weird. I don't think it lasted very long. Of course, we had Young Justice, we had Green Lantern, we had Beware the Batman, which I personally didn't like, and I know a lot of other people didn't, and it got canceled like mid-season or whatever. But for the most part, DC has had a pretty good legacy with their animation, because they actually put a lot of love and care into their animated stuff. But unfortunately, modern DC has just said, screw it. Let's just throw stuff at the screen because people will buy it. Unfortunately, that has been their sort of motto for their live action films as well as their animated films, and heck, even their like animated stuff now, because the only thing they have is Teen Titans Go, and we all know that's pretty much crap, so I don't think anyone's going to argue me on that one. And the films, I'm not even going to get into that, because I know some people will like defend them to the end of the earth, but you know, obviously they're not. The films are just not on par with what DC has made in the past. Like, not even comparing it to any other comic book film or anything. Like, if you just take Batman 1989 or just, I don't know, any of the old DC stuff and compare it to the new ones, it just doesn't even hold up. So let's just go through the DC animated films here, and I'm going to, just explain why the modern animated films are just complete crap. So they came out in 2007 is when the DC films began. Like, that's when they started coming out with all these awesome films that people really enjoy, with Superman Doomsday being the very first premiere one. And a lot of people really liked it. A lot of people bought it, obviously. It made a ton of money. So DC's like, oh, well, let's just keep going. And they made quite a few. And unfortunately, right after, let's see, where was it? I believe it was Batman The Dark Knight Returns. So they made the two-part Dark Knight Returns. And after that, Bruce Timm stepped down as like their producer or whatever. He was like the guy that was over all the films or whatever. And after he left, there was a considerable drop in quality. And there's a number of reasons why. So Bruce Timm actually stepped down from this position, which again, Bruce Timm was over. He was one of the main sort of ushers of that animated series stuff in the 90s and early 2000s. Like, that was him. He was one of the big guys on that. So him stepping down should have automatically been a big sign for people, but the reasons why are pretty evident if you just watch the films that came out after The Dark Knight Returns Part 2. Well, Superman Unbound is kind of that in-between phase where they weren't quite doing what they do now with the films, but they were a little bit lazy, because I remember watching the commentary and they said, well, we can't emulate the comic book style because it's just too good, so we just went with this simplistic style. And that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I own the film, I believe, but I haven't seen it, which it's one of the few I have not seen, so I'm not going to comment on the film itself. But the big point in which the rift begins is Justice League, the Flashpoint Paradox. Now, this film came out, I believe, 2013, and the quality difference was definitely noticeable. Now, the story in that movie was really good, and I think a lot of people really liked it, but the art style and the animation was definitely downgraded, and a lot of the characters looked like they were on steroids, right? But people still liked the film. Like, you know, it was still a good story, even though the animation and art was not the best, which I will give people props for. Yes, it was a pretty good, enjoyable movie. But then it ushered in the new wave of crap, which is Justice League War and Onward, which is, of course, the main purpose of this video, showcasing that DC has completely lost their number one pride for a lot of people, which is their animation department. So Justice League War began this sort of initiative with DC where they said, we're going to have all of our animated films in the same universe, minus like a few that are just kind of off the wall and random. And they're going to have the same art style, they're going to use the same assets, and we're going to pump out 3 movies a year, and people are going to buy them. And they're not wrong, because they do buy them. But the problem is that they considerably lost quality. You see that the art, the animation, the voice acting, which is really strange that the voice acting went downhill, as well as just the story. I mean, pretty much everything about these movies just kind of sucks for the most part. So Justice League War starts. It adapts the New 52 comic, which I actually really liked the New 52 origin of the Justice League. I thought that was a really good comic for the most part. But even being a fan of the comic it's based on, I hated this movie because it was just very cheap. The voice acting was very mediocre, and it took these sort of... It made a few differences. It did stick to it for the most part, but again, like, it took Aquaman out because they wanted to put him in Throne of Atlantis, and that film's a disaster. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And just the stuff they did, I'm just like, why? And why did they feel the need to just outsource all their animation and just make it so cheap and so generic? Like, I don't get it. Like, you had such a good thing going, DC, and then all of a sudden, like, now your stuff looks like freaking garbage. And, you know, people will say, oh, well, you know, I disagree, I really like it. Well, you know, honestly, just go back and look at the stuff they made 10 years ago, and then look at the films they make now. I mean, you can't tell me that a movie like All-Star Superman or Batman Year One are on the same league of Batman versus Robin, or, you know, something like Justice League versus Teen Titans. Like, no, they're just not even in the same caliber. So yeah, Justice League War started the crap fest and started the animated garbage universe. And then after that, we had Son of Batman, which was... DC loves to make Batman films, in case you guys haven't figured that out already. Which, I mean, to be fair, Batman's a popular character. He's got a lot of good stories. I mean, all good for Batman. Unfortunately, everyone else gets the shaft because none of the other characters get to breathe. But Son of Batman was, of course, about Damian Wayne. And the story, once again, was complete crap in that movie. I mean, it's interesting to see Damian and Batman sort of have that relationship, except, again, bad voice acting on like half the voice actors. Batman's voice, I still am not like a big fan of that guy that plays Batman in these films. And what they did with Deathstroke was just so embarrassingly bad. I mean, if you saw the Teen Titans animated series, or you're a fan of Deathstroke in the comics, you can't tell me that that is the same Deathstroke, because Deathstroke in that film got beaten by Damian, a 10-year-old boy, okay? This master assassin, this guy that's taken on the Justice League, gets beat by Damian Wayne. That is embarrassingly bad writing. I'm sorry, I can't excuse that. But we go on. So then we go into Batman Assault on Arkham, which some people really like this movie. And the reason why is because it's about the Suicide Squad, and it's a heist movie, and it's different. And the animation's different, and my computer keeps making noises. I apologize. But this film was different enough to where it didn't reuse the same animation. It was based in the Arkham universe, which, to be honest, they should have just called it Suicide Squad and not Batman. It made it... See, that's the thing I didn't like about the movies, because they're trying to say, like, oh, this takes place in the Batman Arkham universe. Well, first off, that doesn't even make sense, because how can Harley be in the Suicide Squad and then be with Joker? And it's like, no, none of this makes any sense, but whatever. And then on top of that, they have Kevin Conroy being Batman, and he's barely even in the movie, which I'm not like a fan of that. But I get it, like, people like that. Personally, I thought the film was just kind of okay. It wasn't that great, but at least it was something different. Thank the Lord. But then we go right back in with Justice League, the Throne of Atlantis, which was complete and utter garbage. And in fact, I will say this right now. I think Justice League Throne of Atlantis is the biggest insult to the DC legacy of animated films I have ever seen. I think this is the worst movie they've ever made, and definitely a low point for them, because they took this story. They basically took the Throne of Atlantis, I believe, was the storyline. I can't remember. It was like the third big arc of the Justice League New 52 comics, whatever that's called. I read the comic, I just can't remember the name of it. They took that, and then they took the Aquaman origin story, and then they just kind of threw them together, and they thought it was going to work, and it didn't. And it's such a shame, because the New 52, like, one of its big takeaways that was actually good was that they made Aquaman cool. And I think Jeff Johns deserves huge props for that. But the problem is, in this movie, Aquaman, and just everything about this movie just sucks. And it's just so, oh God, it's just the same thing I've been saying, basically. You're going to hear me say it over and over. Bad art, bad animation, bad story, bad voice acting, like, just everything. Everything you would not want in an animated film, you get in this movie. And it just goes to show that pumping out 3 films a year is horrible. It's such a bad idea. But anyway, we move forward. So then we have Batman vs. Robin. Once again, another film that takes place in this universe. And this one to me really got me, because I feel like it was better than Son of Batman, but it still wasn't that great either. And it took a story that I actually really love. Like, it's probably one of my favorite Batman stories from the comic books, which is the Court of Owls. And you have the Court of Owls, and it's just such a good story. If you haven't read it in the comics, seriously, get it. It's like, it's so good. It's volumes 1 and 2. If you're collecting the compilations, it's part 1 and part 2 of the New 52 Batman comics. But it's a really good story. And then seeing it just shredded to pieces, and then made into this, like, Batman trying to trust Robin, like, it's, I don't know why they did it this way, because the comic had little to nothing to do with Damian Wayne, which, I mean, to be fair, Damian is his son, so having him be somewhat involved, I'm like, okay, whatever. But, you know, DC, of course, they have to throw Damian Wayne in everything now. And he's just so annoying if he's not written well. And he's not written very well in these animated films until much later. They finally figure out how to write him. And they basically just take the Batman and Robin comic, like the very beginning arc of that, mesh it with the Court of Owls, and then just completely crap on the story. And make it not even that much about the Court of Owls or Batman and losing his mind and all this stuff. And on top of that, just the bad voice acting from Batman. It's just like, man, why did they have to go and ruin this story? But the one thing I will say, though, is that I think one of the big takeaways from this movie is the fact that Nightwing fought Robin, and that was really cool. Like, that one scene from the movie is the one really memorable thing that I loved about this movie. That fight was really cool. Now, of course, Damian being a little piece of crap in this movie, he technically beats Nightwing, but again, they overpower Damian to such insane levels in these movies. It's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, Nightwing, the one good thing I'll say about these films is that they at least have Nightwing in them, but unfortunately Nightwing gets crapped on a majority of the time. They just shaft this man so bad when he's such a good character. Nightwing is like pretty much on par with Batman, and then they just make him get beaten by everybody, and I hate that so much. But at least it had Nightwing, at least it had Nightwing. This is going to be a long video, I apologize, but let's keep going. So then we have Justice League Gods and Monsters. And Justice League Gods and Monsters was actually pretty good. I wouldn't say it's like top quality, but it's definitely like a really interesting story. It did something different. It had actual good animation. And of course it was Bruce Timm. And Bruce Timm took his time, developed this thing, made an all new story and all that. And it was pretty good for the most part. It wasn't perfect, but pretty enjoyable. And then we go to Batman Bad Blood, which is another one that a lot of people don't like. I actually kind of like this movie. I don't acknowledge it to be the same quality as the older movies, but at least it was enjoyable for me. And it did have a bigger focus on Nightwing, but once again, Nightwing gets shafted in the films because they never know how to write Nightwing. But whatever. Same thing, voice acting, animation, art, garbage. And story, which was kind of just, whatever. Justice League versus Teen Titans, I did not like this movie at all. I think that this movie was a complete mess. And the fact that they just took Damian and just made it the Damian Titans, I did not like that either. And the voice acting, oh boy. Raven's voice actor, I think hers is like easily one of the most criminal ones. Because she just doesn't emote. Like the voice actor it just is not good. It's not good. So yeah, Justice League vs. Teen Titans, not very good. Batman the Killing Joke. Now this is a one that a lot of people were very upset with this movie. Now I actually like this movie. It actually had pretty good animation and art style to me. I know some people are kind of like going against the Bruce Timm art at this point, but I still enjoyed it. And a lot of people just didn't like it for the simple fact that they took the Killing Joke, which was perfectly adapted, and then they threw in this Batgirl story at the beginning, which I kind of agree, like, it does mess up the flow of the movie, because you're basically putting two movies into one. If it were me, I think I would have just had, like, more of an origin of Batgirl, maybe just showing her going on an adventure. Like, I get where they were going with it, but then doing the whole, like, relationship thing and all that, it is just a little bit, why they, whatever. It's just weird, because then when you go into the actual movie, it's like, none of that really even matters, because it's about the Joker anyway. So that movie's a bit of a mixed bag for a lot of people, and I can understand that. So I don't really think I need to go into Killing Joke, because there's been like a million YouTube rants on that one. Justice League Dark I haven't seen, but honestly, just by watching the preview for it, I can already tell, unless it has a really good story, it's the same thing, garbage animation and art. But I'm not going to go into it because I haven't seen it. So I'm being fair. Like, I'm not going to go over the films I haven't seen. And the last one that I saw was the Teen Titans, the Judas Contract, which I actually thought was a pretty good movie. It was probably anywhere from like a 7 to an 8, simply because they finally said, oh, let's just adapt the story. Wow, let's adapt the comic story instead of throwing 3 into one movie. And that's basically, aside from the art, animation, and voice acting, which held it down, I thought it could have easily been like a 9 out of 10 movie if they just would have not had such bad voice acting and some of the animation wasn't so stock. And then Batman and Harley Quinn, people didn't like it very much. I haven't seen it, and I haven't seen Batman Gotham by Gaslight, which I've heard is pretty good. And of course, the upcoming ones, we have Suicide Squad Hell to Pay and Death of Superman and Reign of Superman, which those don't look very good either based on the preview. So yeah, basically just going through all the movies, I'm trying to just kind of explain why, I think that the films are so bad nowadays, because basically they took the quality, time, and effort they took into getting the films right, which is what they used to do. They used to actually look at the art style. They tried to emulate the art style. Every film was completely different art style, completely different voice cast. They really tried to emulate the comics the best they could, and then in these, it's just like a factory line. They just pump them out as much as they can, put little effort and budget into them, and then boom, they're out. So that's basically my problem with DC animated films. I think that they could definitely make them better and come back to where they used to be. The problem is, do they really want to? Because DC has a really bad management problem. So that's basically it for me on the video. It's a really long one, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave your thoughts down below on the DC animated universe, DC Universe animated original movie universe, I guess is what it's technically called. So leave your thoughts on that. I'm sure everyone has differing opinions, and I'm sure there's some films that are modern that you actually enjoyed. So just let me know down below. That's all I have for now. Catch you guys later.